Hello and welcome to Tetch Talk. I'm Tetch, and today we're going to have two guests, both from Techdirt, you know as Leigh Beadon and Mike Masnick. We're going to be talking about their recent games, Trust and Safety Tycoon and Moderator Mayhem. So, I want to welcome Leigh and Mike to Tetch Talk. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, great to be here.
Why don't you tell us briefly a little bit about yourselves, your little history with Techdirt?
Sure, I guess I'll start. I started Techdirt, depending on when you count, in 1997, and have, continued to build it up over the years. And that includes doing a bunch of different things and starting the Copy Institute as a related think tank. And that has led us to building a bunch of games, which is what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, and I joined Techdirt. I don't actually remember now, more than 10
don't
years
either.
ago now, but I don't remember precisely how long. And have been, part of our small team ever since then. And yeah, similarly, it's been exciting, this new game initiative that we've gotten into in the past couple of years. I'm probably the longer term game player than Mike for video games.
We've got two games here we're going to talk about. First, kind of Moderator Mayhem, which came out in May, and then Trust and Safety Tycoon, which came out last month in October. So, what prompted you to get into doing games as a thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's I guess somewhat of a longer story. I mean, I think, I don't know, 6 or 7, maybe 8 years ago, I can't remember exactly now, I had originally had a couple different ideas for some kinds of games. Initially, just like board games that I thought were sort of relevant to the tech policy field. And as I started exploring whether or not that was possible or even what it would take, I got introduced to sort of our third person in the game making setup here, which is Randy Lubin from Leveraged Play, who also has another operation called Diegetic Games, and we got introduced, and he had worked in tech and startups for a while and was also deep into the gaming world, and so we just had a really long, interesting conversation and kind of hit it off. And actually around that time, I was talking to some people in Trust and Safety, and someone had suggested, this is going way back, 2016, 2017 timeframe. And somebody had suggested, like, hey, it would be great if people who are commenting on trust and safety content moderation questions could actually spend some time actually doing it. Wouldn't it be cool if there was originally they said, wouldn't it be cool if there was a video game? And I said, wouldn't it be even cooler if there were a board game? But you'll see where we ended up eventually. And so honestly, like, from this is, so the seeds of the idea for both of these games goes back many years, and sort of thinking about it and then talking about it with Randy and other people. And then we started building a bunch of other games because different opportunities came up or different projects where a game was appropriate. And so we have now done over a dozen different kinds of games. And again, some of them board and card games, some of them group games, in person, group games, virtual, a bunch of different stuff. And then and now video games in the last couple of years. We started finally getting around to doing video game versions of it. And I mean, I think almost throughout all of this, we had been talking about, like, we should do Trust and Safety, the game, in some form or another. And so we had actually worked on a version that was effectively a board game version of this in this sort of 2018, 2019 timeframe, and actually felt that we had gotten pretty close. In early 2020, we had people playtesting a board game version, and then there was like this whole pandemic lockdown thing that that got so that we couldn't test it, and 2, we realized people would not be getting together to play the game anyways, and so we sort of put that on the back burner. And then we just, more recently in the last year, had the opportunity to put together these 2 video game versions.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it too was the runaway success of the CIA Kickstarter game, which you can see on the shelf behind Mike there.
Yes.
That was a big thing, which, it's a little bit different from a lot of our other game projects, but it just sort of solidified for us how much excitement there was around, interesting games, and that there was so much potential there.
Yeah. Sounds thing. I was gonna mention, the starting with the CIA card game and stuff. So yeah.
The CIA card game was technically not the first one, but it was the first one that got attention. Because we before we did the CIA game, we had been working on what became Machine Learning President, which was a large group game that was like an election simulation that was only run a few times. It was sort of a big involved process, and there was a whole like news story about it where like parts of it leaked in a very, very bizarre way, leading to a New Yorker article that implied that the game was created by Rebecca Mercer to relive the 2016 election, when it was actually not created that way. It was created to like try and help people better understand things might happen like the 2016 election as we went forward to future elections. And so we were working on that one. That was the first game that Randy and I worked on together. There were some other people involved in that project as well. We were sort of brought in to help them. And then while basically as that was finishing up, we started working on
Threatcast.
It was Working Futures first, which was creating a science fiction anthology. But as part of that, we created a card deck, and we had sort of this game for scenario planning that Randy helped us out with as well. And so it was while we were working on that the CIA game, that we saw that the CIA had they had admitted that they had used these internal games for training purposes, and somebody, not us, but somebody had put in a FOIA request for it, and they had released this jumbled mess of a document that had 3 different games mixed up together, parts of it redacted, and we sort of went through and were able to pull out what was, the simplest of the 3 games, I would say, and the simplest to recreate, and then recognize that being a work of the U.S. government, that it was in the public domain, and that we could take it, make it look much nicer. Thank you, Leigh. That's all Leigh's department. And fill in the redactions, and we put it on Kickstarter, and that sort of took off. And yeah, that sort of was our first sort of like well-known, famous game.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, the public domain aspect is a big part of why we did it, obviously, because that's, part of our subject matter at Techdirt. Not that, surveillance and intelligence stuff is totally outside of our wheelhouse at Techdirt, but I don't know that on our own we would have just said, let's make a game about CIA analysts, right? But it was that really fun aspect of like, oh, we can take this and use it, because as we are always reminding people, government works are public domain. So that was, a big part of the inspiration there.
Yeah.
Oh. So I hadn't realized. I probably did know some of it and just forgotten it, because it's you've been doing this such a long time now. It seems in many ways, and also isn't it still kind of 2020 as well?
Yeah. Well, that's why like my mind went to Threatcast, which I mentioned wrongly, because that was another election simulation game, sort of inspired by the Machine Learning President, streamlined in a few ways with a slightly different focus, and that was one we were planning as an in-person game like Machine Learning President, a big group exercise, and the pandemic lockdowns shifted it. We started thinking, oh, how can we make this playable online in a video conferencing platform or something like that? And I think all those things kind of happening at once then started pushing us, more towards video games, which initially hadn't really been part of our plan. But as we started, being like, well, how can we make digital versions of these role-playing games? How can we make, print-on-demand versions of the card games, all these things. We just slowly, it was becoming clear to us, people want stuff they can do on their computer, so let's make a video game for them.
Yeah. It was, a lot of it was just sort of taking us where people were going. And people were definitely asking us, like, can you turn these things into games, and can you create them in a useful way? And so, I mean, and then sort of the first like real video game that we did was Startup Trail. And that was last year. That was 2022. And that was just sort of like a startup policy simulator where you're running a startup and have to deal with different policy issues that come up in the process of running a startup.
Including some content moderation stuff,
Yes.
but that wasn't the focus of it. It was sort of all the different policy areas that impact startups.
Yeah.
So, which in many ways we considered the kind of the start of the Trust and Safety Tycoon then, in some ways. Because you have to start, but we'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah, but yes, in a lot of ways it was, and that game is somewhat similar in overall function of how it works to Trust and Safety Tycoon. It was, looking back, it almost is like a prototype for it on the game, interface and interaction side of things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, both of these two games that we're focusing on today, Moderator Mayhem and Trust and Safety Tycoon, play very, very, very differently. One is a very quick fire, short-term game. The other one is a very much turn-based sort of strategy. So speeds everything in one and nothing in the other. What kind of prompted those two very, very different approaches to what are somewhat related topics?
Yeah, I mean, a few different things. So one was, again, like what sort of led to Trust and Safety Tycoon. It's different, but as I said, we had sort of been working on a kind of tabletop game, which has some similarities and some overlapping content to Trust and Safety Tycoon. And so we had been thinking about this sort of larger, like running a trust and safety team game. And then, the sponsor for Moderator Mayhem is this group, Engine Advocacy. It's a sort of trade group representing startups. And that's who we had done Startup Trail with. And they'd come to us and said, can we do something that is much more focused just on the moderation question and like make it even more game-like? So a lot of it was like them coming to us and saying, like, we want something that is like just really trying to get across how difficult content moderation is. Like what a frontline moderator goes through. And then, as we do with all of our games, when someone's pitching us on a game idea or we're thinking about stuff, is we'll go through this sort of brainstorming process of like, what could this look like, and sort of go down a bunch of different paths and say, like, we could do this, we could do that. And one thing that that people at Engine had mentioned, just kind of in passing, is like, it'd be really fun if you had like the swipe interface of like swipe left, swipe right for judging content. And I think we sort of grabbed onto that really, really quickly. Leigh had to figure out how to make it work, but I think we were just like, oh yeah, like, that would get across this sort of game concept.
Yeah. I think it was one of those things where as soon as you heard the idea, you could really picture it right away. Like, and it just made so much sense, the moment that this idea just crystallized instantly. And I think, with obviously both positions, a frontline moderator or a manager of a team, both face time pressures and speed pressures, but it's very palpable for a frontline moderator who just has, we've always wanted to convey that feeling of just an endless stack of questions to answer that never gets that much smaller, and new ones are always flying in, and the pressure's on.
Oh yeah. So let's start focusing more start with Moderator Mayhem. With Moderator Mayhem, I recognize a lot of things in abstract, if not in detail, from the 15 years I spent leading the moderation team at Torrent Freak. So how much of it came from experiences moderating at Techdirt?
Some of it, certainly. Obviously, moderating the comments at Techdirt is something we've done, though we have a very light touch for the most part.
Yeah.
But we still are observing different behavior and thinking about different behavior and watching how people try and get around the rules. But to be honest, I mean, a lot more of it came from both two things. One was reporting on all of these different content moderation stuff, and for a few years we ran this content moderation case study effort where we were looking at all different kinds of challenges around content moderation and seeing different examples, and always kind of trying to highlight the different trade-offs for different choices or different setups. But also, as we were working on the original tabletop version, for the Trust and Safety game, we literally spent, I think it was somewhere on the order of about 40 hours interviewing Trust and Safety people, and just, ask them for example after example after example. And we did that for some of the largest companies around and some of the smaller companies as well. And we wanted all different types of platforms and different setups, and we heard all different kinds of stories. And so we had sort of logged, in our heads, many different examples of, of challenging content moderation decisions and trade-offs. And we sort of use that as initial framing. And then we just, had to build up a huge collection of examples and challenges as we, develop the content for the game.
I recently played it twice back to back on our live stream, and on the second playthrough I was already getting a significant number of duplicates, which I now knew the answers to kind of answer it quicker.
So maybe not. So so there's a couple things on there, which is that there are with Moderator Mayhem, there is a randomized setup in terms of which content you will get. There are certain ones that you are more likely to see at the beginning, because we sort of consider them the training wheels ones.
Yeah.
And so there is a set of, I forget what we called them, dilemmas. I don't know if it's dilemmas in Moderator Mayhem.
I forget now too, but
yeah. Of issues. Maybe it's issues.
Yeah, I think it was issues. And
yeah.
This is all irrelevant. This is what it's called in our spreadsheet.
Yeah. But there is a set that shows up early in the game. You won't see all of them. They're still randomized within that, but you're more likely to see them earlier in the game. And then there's a very big list of other content, some of which gets mixed in the early rounds, and then it starts to go to those in the later rounds. So you can play it a bunch of times and you will see some repeat content. The other thing is, I don't know if we've ever said this publicly, but like, some of the repeat content is not the same. Like, you think you know the answer, but the underlying things that are happening might be different. So
we purposely built it where there's ones where the short info is the same, but the look closer info, if you use look closer, is different, and the appeals you might get are different, and things like that. Yeah, because that's a part of content moderation that we wanted to capture. Two things can look identical on the surface, but when you dig a little deeper, they're totally different contexts, totally different, moderation decisions that need to be made.
So what you think might be the same might not have been the same. But again, like, there is a randomizer that is pulling content, and as with any randomizer, it is likely that you will see some repeat content as you play the game.
And there is obviously a limit on. I'm checking now. I forget how many we actually had.
It's in the
there are, but
500 range,
something like that. Yeah. But eventually, of course, you will see some real duplicates. But yeah.
And I was going to say, then it also leads to kind of shortcutting. I know, this seems like this, so I'm going to just which is again part of moderation. When you see things that look alike, you tend to deal with them alike, and it's and that can be good and bad, as you say. You now tell about the whole changing and things, but. I was going to say, is there any plans for any kind of sort of expansion adding onto it, or new cards to be thrown in at some point?
Certainly something we could do. I don't know that we have a specific plan to do that in place right now, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've thought about it. It is doable. I mean, I think it would basically be if somebody, wants to sponsor us to do it. I know that, there are definitely some companies in the sort of trust and safety vendor space that really like the game. Like, we heard from a lot of them. We did a slightly modified version of Moderator Mayhem for TrustCon, which is the big trust and safety conference this summer. So one of the companies had us do a version that they then had on a big screen in their booth, and people would come and play it was a much quicker version of the game, but they would play on a big giant touchscreen in their booth, and we had a scoring system which is not in the main game, and the top 3 scorers each day got prizes. So we've done things like that where there's like customization, but doing like doing another set of cards and stuff. It's doable. I mean, the game is there. We can definitely build that, but it's a fair bit of work. And so,
and I mean, as an even bigger project, we have chatted sort of offhandedly about what we'd do if we were doing like a Moderator Mayhem 2 or an even expanded version. There are some ideas for the game that ended up on the cutting room floor just because they were a bit too complex or a bit too much of a lift to implement that we still think would be fun. Like we've thought, the game could, as you get to later rounds, could introduce more options beyond just swipe left, swipe right. Maybe there's a swipe up to escalate it to the special team that deals with difficult things. And, like there are fun things that could be done to expand it. And one day we might love to do. But, for the moment, I think it's just going to live the way it is.
Yeah, because we produced Moderator Mayhem in a pretty short time frame, honestly. I mean, it was about 3 months of work, I think.
Yeah, I don't remember now exactly. I think it ended up stretching a bit longer than that, but there were lulls in there when we were working on other stuff too. So it's always we've always got so many things going on that it's a little hard to pin down what the real timeline was of any one specific project because it's always intertwined with others. So,
but it was relatively quick.
I mean, you say other things. I mean, that other thing is putting out 10 articles a day on Techdirt, among other things. And
There's
the podcast and conferences and everything else,
and research reports and other games. And
where do you find the time?
We're as efficient as we can be.
But you say things you had and took out. So is there anything that you wanted to put in, any cards that you want to put in but had to take out?
In terms of features or content or both?
Sort of, moderation dilemma cards, scenarios that you wanted to have in but had to take out for various reasons. Either so the sponsor didn't want them or legal said, which is Kathy, right? Just said, no, you want to avoid that kind of area or, that sort of thing. Or just, questionable taste sort of thing.
Nothing like that, I don't think. The taste issue is there's sort of a broader thing we always grappled with there with all of our games that involve content moderation, which is, the challenge of we obviously don't want a game that's full of the actual kind of really abhorrent content that moderators have to deal with. And that was like a thing we had to figure out very early on in development. And thus we made the decision that these cards would sort of describe the content you were looking at rather than being the actual content itself, which is a thing that has confused some people have reacted to the game saying, why don't I get to see the actual content? Though I think more people have thought it through and have realized, oh, right, because they're not going to fill their games with racial slurs and whatever else. Right, but that's always been a bit of a challenge because it's like we don't want to downplay the fact that moderators do have to look at really abhorrent content. We just also don't want to fill our game with that content. So that's always been a little bit of a challenge with doing content moderation games. But so to your point, though, I don't think there was anything we cut where it's like, no, we can't do that. But there were lots and lots of dilemmas where we were like, well, how exactly do we communicate this? And how do we make this clear? And does, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even remember any of the examples now, but there was definitely stuff that we cut where we're just like, we're not really making the point a point that we want to make here, or this is too confusing because there's all different things, or like there are some things where it's like really, really complex. And some of those we were able to, I think, kind of shift over to Trust and Safety Tycoon, where we could get into a little bit deeper levels of complexity. But in Moderator Mayhem, we're just like, gosh, this issue we can't really. You need like the layers and layers of follow up to make this kind of issue make sense. And so I think we ended up removing some of that stuff. There were some wording choices. I mean, we spent a lot of time editing. And so there were certain things where like, this is confusing, or this is unclear, or this might give people the wrong impression. And so, there were a bunch, I wouldn't say a lot actually, but there were some that we had in the, in first drafts that some of the content that was left on the cutting room floor that we just removed at points. But I don't think there was that much, or I don't think there was anything like, oh my gosh, we can't do that.
Yeah, there's no juicy, the sponsor told us to spike this story, unfortunately, to give you in response. I
have to ask.
Of course.
Yeah. I can't think, there's nothing.
Talking about different kind of content, is there any thoughts maybe for like April Fool's Day having a sort of late 1995 version? Sort of, post Prodigy, Stratton Stratton Prodigy but pre CDA 230.
I mean, there's no plans on that, but I do like the idea of a retro 90s content moderation game, like maybe as its own game or as something else. I think that's going to go in our big list of, ideas to mull over in the
Ideas
future.
to mull over.
That would be pretty cool.
Well, I know Mike. I can see Mike laughing as soon as I said this. I know he knows exactly what time period I'm thinking of.
Oh, of course.
Where-
Though I will say, and I am generally against April Fool's Day stuff, but I will note in the other direction, someone did make a joking suggestion. You're talking about going back to Stratton Oakmont, Prodigy era. Somebody did make the suggestion that we should make a DSA compliant version in which you have to, at the end, you have to go back and explain every decision to the European bureaucrats.
Oh, Lord.
And that's really tempting.
Oh, that sounds like hell.
Yes.
Yeah, we don't expect anyone to finish that version of the game. I don't.
Right. So
We'll see on what FetLife or something is one of the masochists topics. You say you got a lot of feedbacks at like TrustCon and stuff. Do you have any kind of famous people have played it? Kind of influential kind of people. Cory Doctorow or.
I mean, Cory Doctorow said, I think you could reasonably refuse to discuss content moderation with anyone who hasn't played this game. That was his comment on it when it came out. So we liked that piece of feedback.
That was nice. Yes. I mean, definitely, obviously, a lot of people in the trust and safety world played it, and we've heard from a ton of them. We know that congressional staffers have played it, and we've heard from a bunch of them. I don't know if we've gotten any like actual members of Congress or senators to play it. I hope someone has somewhere, but we haven't heard of any. So I don't know that we've heard of anyone like super famous outside of like the world of trust and safety, who's played the game, but it's made the round certainly.
And how much has it made the round? Do you have any kind of play statistics or anything like that as to how popular, how many times it's been played?
I don't even remember Moderator Mayhem. We were just looking at the Trust and Safety Tycoon.
Okay.
Data,
we did have some play statistics, but I'm not sure now what those were either. I don't remember, but
no,
a bunch of people played it.
You say like the congressional staff have played it stuff. Do you think it's significantly changed like their mindset when they talk to their bosses? That's
that I don't know, and that's sort of like above our pay grade. I mean,
but it is also sort of the reason for the game as well, isn't it?
It's definitely
so you're hoping it does.
Definitely wanting people to think through and understand that this is more challenging than a lot of people who haven't thought through these things have said. We've definitely heard from congressional staffers who have appreciated it. And I know that there was like Engine hosted an event on Capitol Hill for Moderator Mayhem and had a bunch of staffers there and played it. And we weren't there, but heard that it went over very well. I've heard from, I had a conversation with a Senate staffer a couple months ago before Trust and Safety Tycoon was out, talking about how useful the game was and I had told that person that Trust and Safety Tycoon was coming, and they said, "Oh, we should do an event on Capitol Hill where people play both of them." So, I mean, people are interested in it. And then, we'll see. Both of them came out this year. We'll see what bills come about next year, I guess.
I mean, based on overall feedback, because we did collect a lot of feedback on both games with forums, they're certainly capable of helping people realize that these things are harder than they thought. Like, it can definitely have that effect. We do, we obviously see a lot of people who are aware that these things are hard and who are very happy to see that portrayed, and they use it as a tool to convince other people. Then there are, obviously there are people who dig in. We do get objections from people who sort of try to find a reason to explain why the game isn't making the point that we think it is making, and say, oh, if in the real world it wouldn't be like this, or
Right.
Some people insist on taking the wrong message, but fewer than you might think. Like, I think actually it gets the message across quite well to most people.
I actually just saw one this morning that somebody was complaining about. It was Trust and Safety Tycoon, not Moderator Mayhem. But they were complaining about because they were saying that like, like it doesn't take into account the fact that all the companies have been cutting back on trust and safety, and like it was just like, it was a slightly negative pointed comment at me personally, and saying that like I never consider these things. And I was like, no, like the whole point of the game is that they need to invest in trust and safety. Like you play the game, that's the message that comes out of it. And so I don't know, people want to be mad.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, yeah, like that's a message. We don't want people taking away the message that it's just like, oh, just put more resources into it. I think that's, we want to capture both that, yes, like this is important and it needs resources. And,
Right.
certainly some companies you could criticize for not putting enough resources or taking it seriously enough. But we also want to convey the message that some of these questions are so difficult. Some of them have no right answers, that no amount of money, no amount of trust and safety staff is going to make everyone happy with the decisions you make. There are, there's some of these problems cannot just be resourced out of, right? Like,
yeah, or solved by internet companies, right? I mean, there are larger problems that go beyond that, and thinking that the internet companies have to solve them by themselves is a mistake. But there's nothing in these games that say like, oh, companies shouldn't invest in this, and companies should just throw up their hands and do nothing.
Well, fair enough then. So let's move on to Trust and Safety Tycoon. So you kind of went through what the impetus, its brain blast and stuff as to thing, but it's a very different game.
Yeah,
it's in layout, in looks, its color scheme, its play style, everything about it is pretty much as different as it can be.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why, rather than trying to go for like a coherent style?
I mean, one part of that is, on the style side is, I mean, there's an element of like the sponsorship involved here. So the Moderator Mayhem, a lot of the overall look, the colors and everything was, drawn from Engine's overall aesthetic, right? Like we use the colors from Engine's like corporate palette or, organizational palette and stuff. So that was an element of the difference in style, whereas Trust and Safety Tycoon was not an Engine project. So we wanted to give it a whole different look. So I mean that's probably the number one main thing. Like as Mike mentioned, we made an alternate version of Moderator Mayhem for TrustCon that looked completely different. In fact, it even probably looked a little closer to Trust and Safety Tycoon in terms of like the color palette and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but I think also there is this element of they're two very different games. And when we were talking about, before we had released either of them, we were working on both of them. There definitely were some questions that came up around like, how are these games different? Like, because we say, oh, one is a content moderation game, one is a trust and safety game. And people are like, well, aren't those the same thing? And so at least from my perspective, I wanted to make it clear like that these are two different games, because otherwise I also sort of had this fear, and we went through this a little bit on the debate over naming the games, that people would think that it's one game. And the games do demonstrate two very different things, and so we wanted to have them be distinct so people realized that they were two different games and didn't just lump them into, oh yeah, like we played this game, when you might not have.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like they're kind of tied up, especially as moderator speed is a factor in both. It's sort of like Moderator Mayhem's kind of a warm up, or you get promoted at the end of it and you end up being put in charge of a trust and safety team.
So early on in our planning for Trust and Safety Tycoon, one of the ideas we'd had was that in between rounds there might be a little mini game where it's sort of like, oh, you need to sit on the front lines with the moderators for a little bit as the manager, and it would basically be Moderator Mayhem inside Trust and Safety Tycoon as a little sort of like mini game between rounds for a variety of reasons, largely just the complexity of implementing that and of merging the two game engines. We scrapped that idea. It just didn't make the cut, but there was always that idea of trying to highlight. And it's funny you say too about the promoted, because that is kind of the end of Moderator Mayhem if you win. And that was early on in our idea with Moderator Mayhem. We were like, well, we want the victory to be guess what? Now you have to do even more of this forever, kind of. And so in a way, you are very right. It is like you win Moderator Mayhem. Congratulations! Now you're promoted to playing Trust and Safety Tycoon.
Yeah, and we did consider. We certainly talked about this idea of like directly tying them so that it was kind of like if you win, again with quotations around it, Moderator Mayhem, like have that push you directly into sort of Trust and Safety Tycoon kind of thing, like congratulations. But for a variety of reasons, they didn't quite fit narratively, and so we just didn't do that. But I mean, the games, there is certainly some overlap in kind of the message and trying to understand stuff. But we also thought it was important to recognize that like content moderation is one thing, and it's an important part of Trust and Safety, but it's not everything. And so highlighting the different things and the difference between like making decisions on a front line in a high pressure environment is different than like trying to set larger policy and resource allocation questions. And so one game handles one of those and the other game handles a different one.
Okay. All right. How many times have you played Trust and Safety Tycoon? And what's your best scores?
I mean, so many times while we were building it up, we would just go through and like run through it constantly, but I don't know how many times I actually played it. I will say, and I don't know if I guess this is kind of embarrassing, right? Because like I wrote a good chunk of the content in the game, and understand the scoring, but I do not do that well. So I see people scoring much better than I do. I think probably but usually when I would play the game for testing purposes, I was sort of like, I'm going to play this like a real person, pretend I don't know the answers, and sort of go with, and again, and I should be clear, like there aren't right answers. I said that in a way that suggests there's like, there is the right way to play it. I couldn't tell you what the right way to play it is. I couldn't tell you what the best score is. I know that like in the run up to us launching it, I was sort of playing it pretty often, and just like run through the whole thing and try and get as much done as I can and sort of play it as realistically as possible and see what comes up. And I was pretty consistently scoring in the 1900s range. And yet after the game was released, we saw a bunch of people who were getting over 2000. And I don't know that I ever got over 2000 in playing it. I'm sure if I sat down and was like, I'm going to try and get the highest possible score, I could probably do okay. But I never really played it that way.
Yeah. And for my part, I probably played it through start to finish far fewer times than Mike did, because especially like the deeper we got into development, Mike and Randy and Mike especially were like very focused on the content and the narrative arc of it, and I had a lot to do on the making the interface work side of things and all of the technical implementation on the front end. So I probably, although I have played it through a couple times, I don't remember what scores I got, because especially for the sort of whole last half of development, I was spending way more of my time just jumping around through it to different screens to make sure different things were working properly, and it was much more functional on my side. So I have less memory of what scores I got when I did play it through all the way. Okay. Yeah. And often when I was playing it through, even large portions of it, I was, sort of QAing for things that could break the interface or screw it up more than I was trying to make the good decisions on all of the dilemmas.
Right.
Yeah.
There were a bunch of things where, things were not working until the very end, where there were things where like, well, this is just not working. And Leigh would be like, don't worry, it'll be working in time. And we're like, okay.
So I mean, Moderator Mayhem was probably the more complicated interface project, because we had to build the, drag and drop swiped interface kind of from the ground up in a browser based system. But both of them had a lot of moving parts. So
yeah.
I was going to say, this one seems a lot more complex than Moderator Mayhem, and in at least in its back end stuff. Obviously, you say that the interface is a lot more complex in Moderator Mayhem, but how much longer did Trust and Safety Tycoon take to develop than Moderator Mayhem overall? You say Moderator Mayhem took what, 3 months? You said earlier.
I think it might have stretched to more like 4. I'm trying to remember exactly, but yeah, I mean, this took a little bit longer.
Okay.
But there's I mean, I wouldn't exactly say we reuse anything, but each of these games, starting with Startup Trail and then moving into Moderator Mayhem and then into this, we've been taking a lot of lessons, because there are certain things under the hood that work in similar ways, with handling a big cache of content and serving it up to people. And so we sort of always knew our plan, and Randy does a lot of the back end like game engine development. We always knew our plan was to try to get something very reusable for different types of games, especially these sort of more visual novel style games, which is kind of what we've now got under the hood for Trust and Safety Tycoon, is a pretty reusable engine that we could quickly repurpose to build like another game with it that flows in a similar way. Still more we want to do on that. We hope one day to maybe even release that engine as an open source thing that other people can use. We're not quite there yet, but
we're not there yet.
Yes,
It's not even quite.
Not quite in there. We're not there yet, but
Yeah.
but for our purpose, like the next game we make that if that has a Trust and Safety Tycoon like flow, like that sort of visual novel choose your own adventure flow, we'll be reusing the engine and making a few more upgrades to it, and hopefully moving towards something more standardized. So some of the development time, even of Trust and Safety Tycoon, was us figuring out not just how to make this game, but how to make tools that we would be able to use going forward for other games as well.
Yeah, and I will say too that like the content side, the content development for Trust and Safety Tycoon was definitely more complex than Moderator Mayhem. And part of that was just because of the narrative flow aspect of, in some ways it has elements of like a choose your own adventure book. And to do that, like you really have to map stuff out. And I complained bitterly throughout this process of how it was breaking my brain, because you really have to hold like a bunch of different branching paths in your head, and you can map them out on paper and in spreadsheets, and we did, but there was a lot that I was just like, it's just like, it's hurting my brain to think through all of these different things, and how do we end up in, and how do you not let it completely spiral out of control? Because it's very easy with this, where like every decision takes you down into a whole new world where you need 500 new pieces of content post this decision, and you have to constrain that in some way, or you're just never going to get the game finished. And so there was a lot of mental stress on figuring out the narrative flow. Whereas with Moderator Mayhem, there was definitely a lot of work put into the content, but a lot of it was like, it didn't matter what happened before or after, and you could be pretty free in like, here's just random content moderation decision.
They're kind of independent decisions, each one.
Exactly.
And I mean, then there are, as we called them in the development, arcs in Moderator Mayhem, which are, some of those things where you're dealing with the angry governor, or you're dealing with the election or whatever. And those sort of, for a little glimpse under the hood, it's like Moderator Mayhem has a huge cache of random generic decisions that can be inserted randomly at any time. And then it has a smaller cache of these narrative arcs that might be like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, however many, cards in a row that get sort of like spaced out through a few rounds, with those random ones filling the space in between. So there was still some stuff to grapple with there, but each arc is pretty straightforward, with maybe a couple different possible outcomes at a couple points throughout it, and kind of stands alone. Whereas in Trust and Safety Tycoon, everything affects everything else. There's branching pathways, whole different routes you could go down. So it was definitely much more narratively complicated.
And even in the arcs in Moderator Mayhem, there are different types of arcs. So there are some arcs where it's just another list of like 20 random cards that you'll see 5 of if you get that arc. But then there are some that go in order, and you sort of, have to go through this process of like, this happens first, this happens second. So we do have, we sort of use those to demonstrate more like consequences of decisions as well. But those are kind of mixed in throughout.
Talking about the content some more, I found this one, there's a lot more, a lot derived from kind of real life as well, including some somewhat absurd ones, such as the whole OK Boomer thing and the brony panic. There seems to be less that needed to be kind of imagined and kind of created specifically for it, because there's real life there's not so strange as folk.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there was a lot that definitely still required, imagination and thinking through and coming up with stuff. And some of them, I mean, like, so like the whole like brony arc in the Trust and Safety Tycoon game, that was like from our very earliest tabletop version. We created that many years ago. And we were, I don't know if it's distressed or amused or whatever, to find out that that arc sort of came true after we had made it up. And then there were,
So it's
yeah,
all the way around. I thought it was,
yeah,
it was inspired by the.
we didn't pull that one from real life. That one came true before we had released it, and we were like, "What the hell is going on?" And there were, I hate to admit this, but there were quite a few of those where we had sort of come up with them as sort of absurd examples that were sitting in our pocket of stuff that we had developed for the game that then later came true. And we would joke about it. We're like, nobody's ever going to believe us that we came up with this before it actually happened. There were a scary number of those have actually come true, and that's actually across a bunch of our games. We have some other games where those things have happened too. But yeah,
Maybe do a lottery number predictor game.
But some of them definitely were inspired by real things. But a lot of them weren't. A lot of them were sort of taking general concepts and sort of just playing them out a few steps and saying like, what's likely to happen here, what can we expect, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, something like, like the OK Boomer one, for example, because that happens very early in Trust and Safety Tycoon, sort of more in our kind of tutorial opening phase of it. And that's where we wanted to illustrate some just basic tensions and basic things you could face, like a decision like that, where something is largely innocuous, but whatever you decide is still going to piss off one of two different groups who are going to be mad at you about it. And there's just no, it kind of feels like you shouldn't even have to be answering this question, but you do, and someone's going to be mad at you with whatever answer you make. And that was an important thing we wanted to hammer home right away. And I think purposely use some lighter things like that at the beginning to ease people into that feeling before suddenly they're facing the same decision, but now it's the FBI at the door, or it's
Gotcha. So, like Moderator Mayhem, was there anything you kind of wanted in but were kind of forced to take out of this one?
No, I mean, I think similar to Moderator Mayhem, there was definitely we had lots of ideas. We had a very big list of potential things, but there was nothing that we like had to keep out for any particular reason. But it was basically just didn't fit. Like we just ran out of time, would just open up too much complexity. But we for this one, we had created sort of a big outline of like different things and themes, and then we sort of fit stuff in, and then we had a whole bunch of other ones. And like towards the end where we needed a few more pieces of content here or there, we would slot in like, oh, let's pull from that list of stuff that we haven't done. So there's definitely more on that list that we could have included, but there was nothing like, oh my God, we can't include this, or that there was any sort of problematic stuff. And with Trust and Safety Tycoon, that one it was Hewlett Foundation and in partnership with Atlanta Council, but they didn't look over anything before we released it. They kind of just said, you guys do what you do. And so we're like, okay.
They had a lot of trust in your safety then.
Yeah. They were very good partners.
Yeah.
As you said, this is kind of like a choose your own adventure. I was thinking of it more of a sort of a maze or a battlefield sort of thing. You got to get, find the best, shortest path through to the end, sort of thing. Do you think that's a fair description of how it could be? Because I mean, there's so many different, choices that cumulatively add up to just the 5 sliders. Or is it 5 sliders, or do you count the 6 topic ones as well?
I mean, yeah, I mean the main mechanics, the ones that can sort of instant lose you the game are, I mean, I think it's only even 4 that actually I
It's 4
forget
on the
now.
bottom and the CEO one.
Yeah, the 4 at
Yeah,
the bottom
yeah.
and the CEO, but you also
Yes.
have the
Conversational
additional
health and the conversation rankings. But you're right
Yeah.
that those first 5 are the ones you most have to be keeping balanced all the time in order to continue going in the game. But you're right. No, I mean the maze description is not a bad one. It is a little bit like that.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that was, and it was always a little tricky of like, how do we balance those different things and how do we make sure that each of those things are in tension? One thing that I was probably tempted to go a little bit more towards, and we didn't really like, very few people. There are a few, you can certainly get fired for losing CEO confidence, but it's pretty hard. And I probably leaned more towards like, let's make the CEO more of an idiot, um, and sort of putting you in tension a lot with the CEO, but for a variety of reasons that probably didn't make sense for the game. It would have, like, for example, so one of the tensions for us on the game development side of this game is that there was a part of me that wanted it so that you were likely to lose a lot, and it would be very difficult to get through. But the problem with that is then you don't see the, like,
End game.
the end game stuff, which we think is important for people to understand this stuff. And so we sort of made it, and I think we were pretty successful in making it so that you're likely to lose once or twice before you get to the end game. And if we had a very dumb CEO who was constantly berating you and disagreeing with you, that would be much harder, and you would be like much likelier to lose and get frustrated with the game in a variety of ways. And so we made it a lot more difficult to lose because the CEO gets mad at you. There's a fun version of that game where the CEO is just a complete tech bro idiot. But that's not the version we released.
Musk mode.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Probably shouldn't have said that. Rip my mentions. Yeah. To the ethos and atmosphere at the start, do they actually have any kind of impact, or is that kind of another thing about where it's just kind of like you poking fun at like the corporate buzzword strategy sort of thing as well?
So there's a couple things there. One is that's also a holdover from the tabletop version. We had that in the tabletop version. And what we found when we were testing the tabletop version, which was always in groups of people playing, was that it actually became very important in the decision making among groups. So groups would come across things. My favorite one was, we had a test, and I think, I can't even remember, again, the early rounds are supposed to be fairly easy. Like, they'll demonstrate tensions, but there's nothing like really, really deep and involved. And like in, I think we may have changed this, but like in the tabletop version, the original version, we had, and this actually maybe this went into Moderator Mayhem. I'm forgetting which things went into which game now, but like there is something with like people are selling heroin on your platform, and what are you supposed to do about it? And that was originally designed to be like, you take this down, because like there shouldn't be any question, shouldn't be much discussion. But in one of the tests we did in the tabletop version, we had people sit there and discuss that for like 20 minutes. And in part, it was based on like the atmosphere and ethos that they had set up, where I forget what it was, but it was like,
like free speech absolutionism or something.
Yeah, like they had sort of taken this approach of like, we're going to be like, really edgy and really, and they're like, so like maybe people selling heroin on our platform is a good thing. And like, it was like, there was like this whole big discussion about it, which was, interesting to see. And so we sort of kept that over, but like, and it does have a small impact on starting states for where things are. But beyond that, it does not have as much mechanical impact on the game as it might otherwise have. And I think if we had had a little more time, I would have liked to have added more because of that, but we didn't really get that.
I think it's one of the things that we feel it was a bit underserved in the final game and could be improved, but it is, to Mike's point, like both it can spark interesting conversations, if a group is doing it, or just interesting thoughts, like it can also, and I think this is the other reason we really wanted it, same or other side of that same coin is that it can be what ends decision paralysis for people, when they're like, do I want to do this or do I want to do that? They look in the corner, they remember, right, we're the quirky site, this is the quirky answer, that helps me make my final choice, and so it's a kind of a useful aid in that way. But I would like to do more with it, and if we do a Trust and Safety Tycoon 2 or something, that will be high on our list of things to expand mechanically in the game.
It does. I had that decision paralysis exactly right. I had it with I think I ended up going with family friendly, I think, and I made my decisions then just with that in mind, rather than what were my initial thought was.
Yeah, it's kind of a grounding feature. It just like it gives people a touch point to go back.
I wasn't sure if it was that, if it actually had impacts on the mechanics and things.
Again, like at the start, it does. It does impact some of the starting meters and everything, but beyond that, it really doesn't.
It doesn't change what dilemmas you see or how the CEO responds to them or anything like that, which is the kind of stuff I think we'd like to do it if we expanded on it. Look, to give you an idea, if you're on a very, very small screen or browser window, those disappear entirely from the interface to create more room for everything that needs to fit in, because they're not actually that important once the game started. So that'll give you an idea of how vital they are. Yeah,
I mean, and then like another thing that someone who was beta testing it had suggested, and again would be a nice thing to add on a later version, is like if at points in the game you are going very much against that ethos or atmosphere, like having that come back and be brought up again, and have people call you out on it. But we just didn't have that in this game.
Yeah, we had also discussed, it would be cool to have like your target platform atmosphere and then the actual platform atmosphere, and like so like you might want to be family friendly, but are you? And then and then have it be a challenge to keep those aligned, or else to decide you're changing your goal.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of different directions.
I think the last 13 months of Twitter ownership has certainly informed a lot of content on this game. It's somewhat an easier game to kind of cheat at a bit, where you get to pick a decision, see its outcome, and then say, no, I want to change it back a bit. At least when I played it through, is it thought about doing in hard mode where literally you pick a decision and that's the decision made?
We have had that exact idea and that exact discussion, which would be cool, because obviously the basis of it is, yes, it would make more sense as a game if you just had to lose, but we want people to see all the content. It is ultimately like an educational and a teaching game. We don't want people giving up before they've gotten to all of it. So we've always, there's always been a part of me, and I think Randy too, was like, I wish, and Mike as well, like, I wish people just had to lose, and had to start over.
I believe that strongly.
Yeah, I think it would feel great, but I do think it would result in far, far fewer people seeing, probably the back half of the content of the game, So thus the decision. But I do agree, like a hard mode or an Iron Man mode in video game parlance, or a would be smart, a permadeath mode or what have you. But another thing we discussed, I mean, Moderator Mayhem has the little achievements in it for getting to various milestones and getting through things. It didn't quite make the cut, having achievements in Trust and Safety Tycoon as well. It just didn't, in our development schedule, didn't quite make it in there. But that would be a possibility as well, which is once you've gone back or reversed a decision, you're no longer eligible to unlock the achievements. You can only unlock the achievements if you stick to your guns and don't reverse decisions. That's one way, something we might do in future for a game like this, to try to balance those things out. Because it's always been a tough balance there. We want it to feel like you can lose, but we don't want to drive people away from the game or have them not see what's in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's the feedback? And like, has anybody famous played this one? Or is it much like Moderator Mayhem, where it's been, some congressional staffers and some like events sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much the same. I don't know that we've heard of anyone. We got a fair amount of media coverage, so journalists are clearly playing the game. which is nice. And we've heard from lots of people who liked it. But again, like, I've heard from congressional staffers who have played it. We've heard from trust and safety people who have played it. But I don't know if anyone super famous. I think that it did, in terms of like usage, I think ended up getting more people playing it in the first few weeks than Moderator Mayhem. But I'm not entirely positive of that. I could be wrong.
Okay. Obviously, you also have the quite interesting and influential guests on the Techdirt podcast. Have you ever thought about adding like a sideline sort of thing where you have the guests play the games through, kind of record them, video, screen capture them, see their face, get their feedback, sort of a bit like say like a hot ones and zeros, or a Star being a reasonable moderator, sort of thing.
I had not thought of that, though. I watched you do your playthrough, and I watched Mike Dunford do his playthrough. Those were the two that I saw, and both times I said, I'll just watch a couple minutes of this, and then ended up watching the whole thing. So it was educational, but I had never thought of bringing people on the podcast and having them play live. But I don't know.
Be cool. Yeah. I mean,
kind of fun.
The closest thing is we had discussed doing some sort of online group event around the launch of the game and getting a bunch of people together in a conference platform or a streaming platform to all try it out. For a variety of reasons, we didn't get around to making that happen with this, but we have run as part of our more broad gaming project, Copia Gaming, we have run a couple, little online Copia gaming hours, as we called them in the past, where we gathered some people to play some simple, like more group games, not so much video games, but there's a possibility we might do something like that for one of those, and maybe in the new year, and get some people playing one or both of these games, or it might end up having them playing something different too. Not sure, but yeah.
I just think it'd be interesting, like a table, like you remember Top Gear, and they had the kind of like the celebrity lap time things, and you have like a list of like Zoe Lofgren is here, and Rob Sheridan is down here, and
could be cool.
It'd be interesting to see what the kind of feedback, how different people approach it. Great video content, It's
not a bad idea. We will definitely consider it.
Well, you know where I am. So going back to both games in general, are there any kind of Easter eggs in the game that have been spotted by people, or are there any Easter eggs that you wish people had spotted and are ready to spill the beans on?
Well, I mean, what is there? There's the dog references, right? For what's his name, who always wants a dog in the game.
Darth, Darth, who became famous on Twitter and has now moved to Blue Sky mainly. It's I don't know who the person actually is, but they're Darth and they're famous. And they right before we launched Startup Trail, I had tweeted, because this was still back in the Twitter days, like, hey, we're launching something really cool tomorrow. And Darth had said, does it involve dogs? It better involve dogs, Mike. And so we at the very last minute, like literally hours before launching, added a hidden dog to Startup Trail. And so there are dog references in the games for Darth. We do have in Moderator Mayhem, there's the cat reference. We couldn't find the dog reference. But do you want to explain what the hidden cat is?
Yeah, and I do think a reasonable number of people have seen it. If you swipe fast enough in Moderator Mayhem to actually empty out your stack, which is quite difficult to do, to actually clear out all of the things, there is a hanging cat with the hang in there line, like the classic office motivational poster, is hiding down there at the bottom of your stack of cards, for anyone who's going fast enough, because we thought that'd be a fun
That's a little Easter egg.
I've never gotten anyone close to fast enough for that sort of thing.
I don't think it's really possible to do it while making anything resembling real decisions. I think you pretty much just have to
swipe
stack to see it. Yeah,
and then you can see the
and you see it for a split second before new cards start coming into your stack on top of it. Yeah.
I don't think we really hit anything like that in Trust and Safety Tycoon. We had talked about at one point, but I don't know that we ever got anything really in there that's like the cat in
No,
in
not
Moderator
really.
Mayhem.
But yeah, we should put in more Easter eggs. It's always, we're a very small team developing these games. We're not really technically like game developers. Like that's sort of a skill we've been picking up as we go along. So the reality is we have a lot of fun ideas, but when they're firmly on the would be nice list, like Easter eggs, they often just have to go by the wayside because there's so much core work left to do when we're getting into crunch time on these games, So
So that's more cutting room floor things that we were talking about earlier. Then is the
we always discuss different Easter egg ideas. Yeah, I mean, we like definitely also, I'm not even going to get too deep into this, but like other stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor on the content side, there was a few times where we were working on stuff and again, like we didn't want to put like actual bad content in there. Again, it's descriptions of content, but there were a couple times where there was a way to sort of euphemistically put in terrible content in a way that was very funny when you were sort of like deep in the weeds, and we were like, this probably should not go in the game. But there were discussions of like we could effectively hide things that way, but that never came to be.
So what's next for the gaming thing? Have you got more games planned? Is there sort of a timetable? What next have we got to look forward to?
We'll see. We've been talking about a few games with a few different folks who have approached us about sponsoring new games. And then we have a couple other things that we've been talking about on our own, about some follow-ups to some other stuff that we've worked on. And some different ideas, but we are not like heads down on another game project definitively right now. We have a couple other things that we're balancing, and that it may depend on if some of these other organizations that are interested in sponsoring a game come through or not.
And we do have an idea for another Kickstarter card game that's a little bit backburnered right now, though we do have some, a lot of good first step design work done on it. We hope to bring that back one day. I don't want to say too much because there's still a lot that could change, and we have no idea when this will become a full-blown project again, but that's lurking out there as a possibility.
To be clear, there are two different possible Kickstarter games.
That is true.
And there's a question of one that I think would be much easier to get done, and one that will be really cool but is complex, and we had spent a lot of time working on it, and it still needs more time.
And then we also have, some of our existing not video games, but like group games and sort of mega games and stuff that we would love to run more times as well, right? I mean, we have our Threatcast election disinformation game. Obviously, we're coming up on election season again. There's some potential we'd love to run a few more editions of that. Also, especially games like that, which, were originally planned to be in-person group games, pivoted to online during lockdown era. Now it's starting to become possible to do some of those in person again. Would love to make that happen. We also have our Money City game that was about the future of cryptocurrency, and that's one we'd love to run again. And we've also talked about doing a version of that that's more focused on AI than the crypto side, which, so there's other stuff in the works. Things, especially those big group games, are really, really fun to run with a group of people. So we'd always love to do more of those.
But but those take a lot of work. And so usually we're looking for a sponsor or like a conference that wants to run the game as a part of them, which is kind of what we've mostly done in the past. But, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, talk about conferences. Are there going to be any conferences where we can see either one of you coming up in the next short while?
Mike just got off like 3 weeks of back-to-back conferences.
It's been nonstop conferencing. And so, I had so many conferences lately. I don't think there's anything coming up. I mean, the rest of the year is finally finally starting to slow down.
You say rest of the year. We're filming this right before Thanksgiving, so
Yes,
Yeah.
there's
yes.
not much
No.
left of this year.
Yeah.
I'm sure there will be conferences in 2024.
Yeah.
But I don't think we have any of those pinned down just
We
yet.
don't have
Yeah.
anything set right now. No.
All right, fair enough. So, if people want to find out more about you, and obviously there's Techdirt, of course, but where can they find either one of you to kind of harass, follow, and cheer?
The harassment stuff. I should say you can harass me on Twitter because I'm almost never there now. But I'm mostly spending my time on Blue Sky, a little bit on Mastodon. But a lot, most of my social media, mental focus is on Blue Sky, which I think is probably the most interesting of them for me, at least.
Same, yeah.
And I just haven't been on social media a lot in general lately. I am still a little bit more active on Twitter than Mike is at this point. So you can go find me there, or I mean, I guess you can find me on Instagram, though that mostly is to do with a bar trivia night that I run. So I don't know, you can, but yeah, find us on social media, or yeah, come to Techdirt. We're always there, or become a Techdirt subscriber through our insider shop, and you can join the Techdirt Insider Discord, and you can chat with not just us, but all the Techdirt writers and all of our big fans and readers and stuff. That's a really good place, especially if you want, tech policy conversations and stuff. That'd be the ideal place to come find us. But
Yep.
There you go then. All right, I want to thank both of you for your time. This has been a wonderful, it's a great and very entertaining and very enlightening discussion, and I want to again, thank you for your time, and hope we get to hang out and play some of these games in person someday soon.
Yeah, thank you. This was really fun, and a lot of great, questions to ask about the games. It's fun. We like talking through all these things, and so yeah, that was great.
This was fun.
And say, you want to do that guest thing? Call me.
All right,
sounds good.
All right. Well, I want to thank Mike and Leigh for stopping by and chatting with us for this last hour and a bit. I've certainly learned a lot. I had my mind blown about certain things, and it was, I think, a thoroughly interesting debate. I didn't know Mike had watched my stream either, because I hadn't, as we're recording this, I haven't posted it to YouTube, which it now is on YouTube. But yeah, and if you've enjoyed this, do please hit a like here on YouTube, and subscribe if you're not already. But that's it from me for this time. Take care, be safe, and make smart decisions with what you do online. Bye for now.